previous segment, we discussed Thomas Hobbes and his arguments that the state's useful for escaping the state of nature and for avoiding violence, vengeance, and for promoting peace. In the next segment, we will discuss John Stuart Mill's harm principle and the view that the state improves human welfare by preventing us from harming each other, and that the state does this largely through the criminal law. These two views are related, although they are argued for in different ways. One thing that both have in common is that they set out a rather limited role for the state. The state's needed to prevent us from fighting with, harming, and doing violence against each other. Views of this sort could be offered as the sole justification for the state. This is what the state is good for, and so this is all the state should do. Or views of this sort might be offered in tandem with other views. So this is one thing the state should do for us, but it's not the only thing that the state can or should do. There's also room for a distinction between two different roles the state might play in helping us to live and work together cooperatively and productively, even if we think this is one of the roles of the state, this preventing violence. So on one view, the state enables us to live together peacefully and productively simply by preventing us from doing violence against each other. The state allows for peaceful and productive relations to flourish simply by creating laws that prevent us from doing violence against or harming each other. So the state creates the basic conditions for peaceful coexistence and then gets out of the way. On a different view, the state creates the conditions for peace, but then it also takes steps to improve economic life and efficiency of exchange through, say, state-enforced contract and property law. The state might take steps to improve incentives toward innovation through patent and copyright law. The state might take steps to ensure that all have enough and are educated so that they can be happy and productive members of society by having compelled taxation and redistribution. The state might get involved with solving coordination problems and collective action problems, providing public goods and public infrastructure through compelled taxation and public finance. And the state might try to harness the knowledge and expertise of the population through various regulatory and administrative agencies. So, even from just within a frame concerned about the state's role in promoting happiness and welfare, and so leaving aside for the moment the state's role in promoting equality, freedom, or justice, we see two very different views emerging, or if not exactly two different views, something like a spectrum of views. So on the one hand, on one end of the spectrum, there are those who think the state should play a relatively limited role. So Robert Nozick, in his recent classic, Anarchy, State, Utopia, defends what he calls a minimal state, or a night watchman state, a government which protects individuals via police and military forces from force, fraud, and theft, and administers courts of law, but does nothing else. Ayn Rand sets out a similar list of what the state should be up to in her book, The Virtue of Selfishness. So she writes, "The proper functions of a government fall into three broad categories, all of them involving the issues of physical force and the protection of men's rights. The police to protect men from criminals, the armed services to protect men from foreign invaders, and the law courts to settle disputes among men according to objective laws." So both of these views, the Nozick view and the Rand view, have a clear affinity with both the Hobbesian argument concerning self-defense and the state of nature, escaping the state of nature, but these views differ in the details of the arguments. Both Nozick and Rand endorse what might be described as a libertarian view, because they ground their view of the appropriateness of the minimal state on the significance of individual moral rights. So in particular, Nozick and many libertarians embrace a view on which A, we should have a minimal state, and B, the reason that we should have a minimal state is that there are individual moral rights to self-ownership, and C, these rights can be made to extend to things beyond just our physical bodies, so that we can have strong, even inviolable, moral rights over property, say. And D, a non-minimal state, something more than the minimal state, will by necessity unjustifiably or inappropriately intrude on these rights, the rights to self-ownership and the rights to our property. We'll talk in more detail about these views when we turn to talk about the state's role in promoting or threatening freedom, but it's worth noting how these views interact with some of the discussions about the state's role in promoting happiness or utility. Another kind of view suggests that we should have a minimal state because it turns out the state isn't good at doing more. it's inefficient or wasteful or unwieldy. We'll talk about this kind of view more as well. And there are questions we can ask, and we will ask, about what exactly is meant by minimal here. What should be included in the state, and why? On the other side of the spectrum, so we have the libertarian side of the spectrum, on the other side of the spectrum are those who think the state can and should be doing more than just preventing us from doing violence or harm to each other. We'll consider many such views in subsequent segments. Let's turn to the next segment, then, in which we'll encounter John Stuart Mill and his famous articulation of the harm principle.